All right, thanks everyone for coming, taking time out of your busy day to come listen to Jason Kunesh. Jason was most recently the Director of User Experience and Product at Obama for America. He's an advocate for elegant, simple solutions to gnarly problems wherever people meet technology. Prior to the campaign, he founded a design firm named Fuzzy Math in Chicago. He's worked with a lot of private organizations and also had professional stints at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and DePaul University. Everyone, Jason Kunesh.
Howdy. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Google, for setting this up. It's a real privilege to be here and talk with you today. So today I'd like to share a little bit about what happened with user experience on the campaign in 2012. And I'd like to sit a little bit on this slide and just sort of describe where this unique title came from. So when I was first considering joining the campaign, I talked to a few friends who'd worked in politics before, and one of them gave me a piece of advice, which was, people from the campaign are going to be from all over the country, and they're all going to have different motivations and different things that are prompted them to be there. And so early on, you need to decide whether people are, where they're coming from. And the term that she used was, were they true believers, politicos, or Kool-Aid drinkers? And so I took out the true believers because it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But basically what 2012 was about was politicos, geeks, and Kool-Aid drinkers. We all, geeks were a new aspect this time around. Like in 2008, we had a new media team, but we didn't have an actual technology team in-house working within the campaign structure itself. And so this was sort of an experiment for the campaign and a fairly large risk. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how that worked out for us today. As far as politicos go, politicos are typically people who their career is within politics, right? Their purpose in being there is to get the candidate elected, but they're also somebody who's going to continue on in some form of public service. Maybe they're going to go serve in a House seat, or maybe they're going to go serve within government itself. But they're sort of aligned more in the traditional power structure of Washington. And Kool-Aid drinkers is always a term used for the people who really believe in the candidate. And for some campaigns in the past, maybe there were candidates that didn't inspire everybody the same way, and so there was a little bit of difference as to whether everybody on the campaign believed in the candidate or not. In our case, we were all Kool-Aid drinkers, so it made our jobs a lot easier in some ways. Like no matter how much conflict you had in terms of background or motivation, we all were there for the same purpose, and a lot of the times reminding each other that was why we were there was, was a way to get through some of the disagreements in the meantime. So we'll talk a little bit about the campaign. It's an 18-month effort for us. As an incumbent, you have a pretty rare position in that you don't have to run in the primaries. So we took that year before the general election season started and built out a team in Chicago. We knew we'd have a budget of roughly $1 billion. We knew we'd have 18 months to work within. And we have one success metric, which is the election. And there's actually no directly measurable way for you to know how you're doing. You've got to sort of infer your progress based on all the other metrics around it, because you can't really know until it's too late to actually affect change, whether you're actually doing the right things to win. So this is the office when I joined. There was about 30 people on the campaign. We would grow this almost at 10 to 15 people, sometimes 20 people a week, until we had over 800 people in an office in Chicago in the middle of summer that was rated for maybe 500 people. It was about 80 degrees when you showed up in the morning. It was a little bit of culture clash for a lot of us. We had some Googlers who came out on sabbatical and helped out. They weren't used to the fact that this was actually the kitchen, at least until building services shut down the hot plate. This is our daycare. So those are my daughters on Saturday. They'd come to the campaign with me, hang out and make posters. This beer pong table, this is actually a conference room, at least until it got confiscated by interns, and then they sat there. This too is a conference room, believe it or not. This is Winnie Lam from Google. She was on sabbatical. It's Leah Abraham from Facebook. So we're sitting here thinking, I can't believe we're facing a wall with a projector. And people from the campaign side, field staff and politicos, are like, are you kidding me? You guys have a projector? Why are they coddling you? So there was a little bit of culture clash. This is, basically us managing a whole bunch of our projects online. It's not quite online, if you'll notice. It's actually a bunch of stickies on a wall. But it was a way for us all to communicate, because we were used to using tools that I think would be pretty familiar to you. GitHub, Basecamp, things that don't seem like they're kind of second nature to use in our field. But they were all new to the people on the other side of the campaign that we were serving. So we're part of this technology team. There's people who are doing field organizing. There's people who are running policy, fundraising, all sorts of other aspects of the campaign. And none of them have used the tool sets that we're familiar with. So this kind of culture clash led to us coming up with solutions to actually hack our internal relationships, to make sure that what we were doing actually made sense to people who really hadn't developed software before or weren't familiar with things like iteration or improvements to processes and products. This is called document security. So whenever press would come in, we'd put up these huge sheets of paper and cover a wall. I'm still not sure why we did this, but this is part of what we had to do. This is a product demo. So it's a little unnerving, but there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the campaign in general and sort of what it is, what we're trying to accomplish. A campaign, you're trying to get 270 electoral votes, and there's really no written way to do that, one like master plan. Our plan was based on our values. So 50 states, we'd run a 50-state campaign. We'd find as many pathways to victory as we could. Yes, it comes down to like 3 counties in Ohio most of the time, but the notion was that the more that you actually created a playing field that was across the nation, the more that you made your opponent do that, but more to the point, the more that you're actually organizing people in those communities and empowering them to make change beyond just the election. Also for us, one of our core tenets was that we were there to expand the electorate. Right? In other words, we're there to help people get registered. Ideally, Democrats, but if we happen to elect register Republicans as well, that was okay. Right? It was kind of the cost of doing business in terms of making sure that we're actually getting people engaged, period. Now, if you're the other side, and I'm not, entirely familiar with what Romney's camp was thinking, but overall Republican strategy seemed to be, excuse me, you basically suppress votes in places like Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania, and you use, really huge ad buys on media to make sure that, your message is not, either cleanly getting out there or that you're kind of going negative on your opponent. It's another way of running things. This was our idea that, we could use this to be a little more successful. Overall, in campaigns, you're here to do 5 things. So the first thing is register people. So we want you to be registered. We want your friends to be registered. Some of the ways we did this were really traditional. There's a football game in town. You send some volunteers out and you ask them to register voters there, right? Bring in some forms, do stuff like that. We also offered online means for people to register. You'd have to print out a PDF. We'd at least get you started in the process and create some email reminders and kickers for you to do more. In Nevada, you can online register. We also did things like we asked you to connect your Facebook social graph. And once you did that, we asked you to ask your friends to also register, which turned out to be really successful. Next thing we do is persuade. So just basically convince you that our guy is the right guy for office and convince you to do the same thing with your friends. And so a lot of what we did online was tuned to do this, right? In terms of producing infographics or producing other pieces of shareable content that we could get to people so that they could get that to their friends and again, start those conversations and build that community. Finally, turnout. So when it actually is time to vote, that people are getting to the polls, either that they know where their polling places are. Google did a great job of making sure that there's polling place lookup across the country. It's amazing. But also early vote. Early vote is key. The more that you get people early voting, the more that you can get them engaged, because once you voted, you don't have anything to do on election day, supposedly. So you can come and do some volunteer shifts and help make sure your neighbors and friends also have access to the polls. And then finally, you might have received an email or 2 during the campaign. We ask you to donate. So I didn't know about that. We sent quite a few emails. I'm sorry, but we had to. And then also volunteering, so actually getting people to come out and contribute directly. So I thought I'd show you a little bit of how that actually plays out. For the most part, what we do is county by county, state by state, across the country. We divide the entire country into turf, right? And from there, we open up some field offices. Now, this is a really lovely field office. This is one in Los Angeles. In Montana, the field office is an organizer's car, right? And they just drive the state, and that's it. So one of the unique things that we had to deal with in producing software to help the field organization is that every one of the states is completely different in terms of what they're trying to accomplish and how they do it. And so like in California, you are awesome. You call most of the country and you have this incredible volunteer presence. In Montana or in Louisiana, it's a fairly lonely job being a field organizer in a deeply red state. And so you're probably either calling into a different state or you're trying to just simply build community. But that's where all the action is. In general, what's happening there is they're getting people to come to events and do stuff like this. So there's a big piece of paper on the wall. Give us your name, email address, and phone number, and somebody will get in touch with you. One of the problems with this is it's a really lossy way of doing things, and it's a really intense bunch of data entry that has to happen after these kinds of events. So a lot of the software we tried to develop and the programs we put in place were things to try to make this easier for people. How can you get this information without having this thing on a wall? Honestly, we were somewhat successful, but not entirely, because again, we were sort of the experiment. We're the new kids. So a lot of what we did hopefully hinted towards where things could go in the future. Once you get involved, we have what's called a ladder of engagement model, and this is fairly common in nonprofit and civil society organizing, which is the notion that once you get involved, you get some awareness of what's going on and what the issues are, you'll actually show up and we'll have what's called a one-on-one with you. So in this case, this is New Mexico. So Deborah is a First American, and she's talking to a fellow First American, and they're basically having a conversation where they're sharing their story and learning a little bit about each other and figuring out how we can get her to be active in her community. Now, some of the challenges we faced were that, our demographics were basically 51% of the nation that we were trying to address in terms of population. And we knew a lot of things about them in general. It's sort of a U-shaped demographic. So on the lower end, you had folks who were 18 to 25. They were maybe just out of high school or in college or taking a break from college. And they had mobile devices. Maybe they had a tablet. They might have never owned a desktop computer. They had a very different set of assumptions about sort of social media and how the internet could work for them. On the other side of things, you had folks who were 55 and up, predominantly female, mostly using desktop computers, probably not that comfortable with them. Maybe they got on Facebook in '08 because of the president the prior time around, but they weren't really comfortable with social media or really that familiar with it. And then you just had outliers. She doesn't have a cell phone. She doesn't have a landline. She doesn't have a computer. So how can we help Deborah, who has all those things, make sure that she can be empowered in her community to still know what she needs to know and get the materials she needs to help activate people around her? So once you get involved, excuse me, we're going to put more stickies with Post-its on the walls, and we're going to ask you to do a whole bunch of stuff around canvassing. We're going to describe to you how voting works. We're going to train you, and we're going to send you out. We're probably going to do that with a big piece of paper. Right? So this is sort of traditional, how organizing happens. And then, this poor gentleman here is going to get this giant set of clipboards, and he's going to spend all night pounding that information in so that he knows if that door was knocked on and who needs to register and all that sort of stuff. This is all stuff that we were here to stop having happen in this way. Right? So one of the things we did was we built an app that took this type of a map, and you could see it on your smartphone, Android or iPhone. And then instead of having to have him pound in the data as you're going door to door and updating the information, it immediately synced back. That stuff seems really like drop dead simple for us, but in this place it was new and crazy and things that had never been attempted before. So a lot of what we had to deal with was cultural. When somebody gets activated, what happens is basically you've got a team leader, and this is called the snowflake model. So when we organize in neighborhood teams, this is sort of a new thing for the Obama campaign within presidential politics. This is what drove us to win in '08 and in '12. The notion that you don't just organize a bunch of people and have them kind of go out en masse and just do things. What you do is you empower people to take on specific roles. So here is Sonia. She's a team leader in New Hampshire. So she's sort of at the center of the snowflake. She's a volunteer who's volunteering 20 to 40 hours a week. Around her are a Canvas captain, a phone bank captain, a data captain, and a volunteer coordinator. What that means is help people knock on doors, help people make phone calls, help enter all that data, and just help wrangle everybody. And then because it is a neighborhood and community-based organization, you can have roles like Super Volunteer Mike or Phone Banker Extraordinaire. One of the rules of any good field operation, any good field office, is anything that people want to contribute is of value. Right? So I can't tell you how many field organizations I've been a part of where you walk in the door and there's somebody who's the comfort captain. And what that means is that it's a little old lady who comes and brings brownies and coffee every morning and hangs out and talks about what she thinks about the president. And it's awesome, right? That's what she contributes. So from that place, there's tons of those in every city and every place around the country. We had about 1,000 of them overall. So this is Albuquerque, and you can see they've got 3 neighborhood teams that they're tracking, again, in paper, on a wall, not in any way actionable or data-driven or online. So these are the types of things that we were here to change. And people knew they needed to change within the campaign itself. So organizers, if nothing else, they're not, they're super resourceful. So they started using stuff, bless you, like Facebook and other means, Google groups, Yahoo groups, to start to organize their groups, online. The unfortunate part was that they weren't actually connected back to the campaign in any meaningful way. So they weren't able to actually share information or understand what was going on. They were more just like a little, splinter cell kind of running off on their own. So a lot of what we came here to do was revise the technology stack that existed. This was from May 23rd of 11. This is when I first showed up. This crazy diagram is the thing that we went through as we realized how all the vendors existed and worked with the campaign and with the DNC and what the sort of relationships were back and forth. It was this crazy pile of stuff, and there was no clean way to see how we could actually build an outreach effort on top of that. So our goal was to make it a lot simpler. Right? And so that's basically what we were about, yeah, right? Make it clean. So one of the big challenges in terms of user experience was that our users weren't actually there. Right? So in campaigns in general, about 80% of the work happens over the last 2 months. So when you're 15, 16 months out, there's really nobody to test on because there's nobody who's actually involved. Right? There's not a lot of presence on the ground. There's not a lot of purpose in having it yet. It's expensive to keep going. So what we did instead was we tried to build trust amongst our own team members. Because everybody who'd worked on the political side of the campaign, for the most part, had been there for quite a while, right? Some of these folks had been there 5 years. Some had been with the president since his state senate runs, so they've been there almost a decade. So they're convinced that the new kids on the block who are showing up from industry are a little bit suspect, right? They're like, are these people here to make a startup out of all this? What is their goal, right? And in reality, we're showing up and we're basically the true believers. We're like, oh, we're here because we believe in the president. This is great. And they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, we don't trust you. We've seen technology people before. Who knows? So some of the stuff we did early on was just like this. It's a participatory design session. We don't have actual users. So we put in stakeholders in the place of users. We had generated some personas, user personas, by interviewing people who had been field organizers 4 years ago. We asked them to reflect on what they knew about organizing, what the issues were, who the people were, describe people in the field offices, describe how it all worked together. And once you've done that, we had them sort of play act as the different people. So like here you can see there's a couple user personas for each table. There's also beer, very key at design sessions at the campaign. And then we'd ask people from technology, field, and policy to get together and describe what the software would look like for these people. We'd have them draw it out, and we'd take those drawings and we'd use those as the basis for ongoing work. But it was definitely something that was unique to this environment in a way that me personally, I was not prepared for. I've been doing user experience work for a long time, and I remember the days of having to explain, this is a wireframe, this is a persona, this is why iteration is valuable. I wasn't prepared to do that here, right? I thought, oh, well, everybody, it's 2011. I mean, who doesn't know that you do this stuff? It turns out a lot of people don't know that you do these things. And so, our approach was really viewed as being really risky, right? In the past, the campaign had used vendors, and those vendors operated with the traditional, here's a big RFP, you send it to the vendor, you're probably friends with them, they probably got their start in organizing as well, so there's some kind of prior relationship. They're going to disappoint you by delivering maybe half of what you're actually looking for, not because they're trying to screw you, but basically because they're really tapped, right? Political campaigns are not giant money-making endeavors for software developers. They're there pretty much because they really believe in what they're doing. And so it gets this kind of unhealthy dynamic. So we came in to change that dynamic, and it, was a little tough sledding early on. So one of the things that helped us out was we had this intern. You may know him. He's on the right side of the screen there. He was an intern for us because in FEC law, if he actually stepped foot on the plane, he already couldn't actually do anything because it was his FEC law would determine his past $5,000 in value. So Mr. Schmidt was an intern, and so he would show up and basically he did two things. One, he kept us on target. So he would do product reviews. This is a product review we're doing for some of the stuff we'd been working on in the prior session. And he also just provided us with air cover, right? You've got a team that, we were building things in the slow but steady way that you do when you're developing a giant infrastructure project. So a lot of what we were working on wouldn't launch for almost a year. So in the meantime, there's a campaign that's running around you that is focused on the now, the moment, the weekly goal, the monthly goal. And there's these, slovenly looking people with beards and, questionable t-shirts in the corner. And they're not doing anything, right? They're not producing anything yet. They look kind of like a cost center. So one of the things that Eric was able to do was tell the campaign, yes, I've talked to those people and they look funny, but they actually are sane and they're doing good things and it will actually work out for you. And it provided us with some pretty valuable cover for a while because we had a lot of stuff to do. So we were on the campaign about 540 days. It was a 50-state campaign, about 1,000 field offices. We had 10,000 of those neighborhood volunteer leaders. We had over 2 million volunteer shifts, so that means 4 hours of phone banking, 4 hours of canvassing. People did that over 2 million times. We registered over 2 million people, and in the 5 battleground states that we were most concerned about, we registered more people than the margin of victory. So this investment in technology and field paid off. 150 million phone calls total were made, a ton of them out of California, so thank you again if you were one of the people doing that. And we launched, believe it or not, 200 apps during that 540 days. So that's a metric ton of appage. And so, we had a lot of pressure on us. We communicated with Cake a lot during the campaign. It made a lot more sense at the time. This was the DevOps lead, Scott Vandenplas, brought this cake in right before the election. I think Eric Schmidt was the only one who was brave enough to cut into it. We were all convinced that it was somehow a talisman at the end. It made sense on very little sleep. But seriously speaking, we all felt a ton of pressure. At the end of the day, we knew that a lot more was riding on this than just, getting a good job out at the end of the campaign or whatnot. It was a chance to impact the direction of the country and contribute to that. It was also something that we all felt very seriously as people representing our craft. I was the first UX person on a presidential campaign. I felt a really huge sense of duty that if things didn't measure up or we underperformed and we lost, that this would be an experiment that wouldn't be tried again because it would be pointed at as the thing that failed, right? The new thing is always going to be either the thing that gets all the credit. So we've gotten a lot of credit out of this race because, oh, look at technology, that was the differentiator. And, some of that is true, but in reality, it's a ton of really small pieces. So you just work on every little thing that you can and do the most you can on every single little thing. And you hope that that total of stuff that you've done adds up. So I guess the point being we're being praised as being the saviors, but if we had lost, we'd also be being pilloried as the people who totally screwed things up. So I'm going to take a moment to tell you a little bit about how I came to be here. This is my hometown. That's my backyard. It's a little town called Marinette. It's way, way, way up north. So I'm from way north in Wisconsin. Basically, it's all forest. That's my fam. I'm a little bright-looking chap there. I'm old enough to remember when Jimmy Carter gave his speech about, basically how self-indulgence and consumption were not the path to happiness, and that it was not going to actually engage our body politic in a way that was meaningful. Our country rejected that, right? We elected a TV spokesperson instead. But I was cool. I had an Apple II. Things were good. Until 1986, when that man, Eugene Hasenfuss, who happened to be my next door neighbor, got shot out of a plane in Nicaragua because he'd been hired by Air America to drop weapons for the Contras against the Sandinistas, and he started the Iran-Contra scandal, which, remembering what Jimmy had said about, trust, transparency, and working together, it seemed to be pretty much the exact opposite. That what our government was doing. And it encouraged me to do a lot of activism, mostly volunteering. Moved to Chicago, joined a band, left the band, got married, joined Orbitz, helped co-found Groupon, and then kind of was on my way, had a daughter, things were great. In '08, I was running a professional services firm and user experience in Chicago. So I was actually on a plane flying out here to work with a client. Right? We've been donors, and I had volunteered to get out the vote in Wisconsin for the president and for candidate Kerry, but that was sort of it. That was the end of my activism. And things changed for me when my daughter Vivian was born. She was born 3 months premature, and so we were really nervous about whether she would live, and for a while my wife's health. She got better, and Vivian was still in the hospital, and one day at about 4:30 on a Friday, I got a call at home saying, hey, you guys misfiled this form in the ER, and it looks like what you need to do is fax us this form with a doctor's signature by 5 o'clock today, or you'll owe the entirety of the bill, which at that time was almost $500,000. And so here we are, we're doing everything right? We've got jobs, we've got insurance, we've got all this stuff. And on TV at the same time, we're hearing about death panels and how awful the American Care Act would be for people. And so that disconnect was really striking in my head. She's fine, that's her there. But at the same time that she came out of the hospital, Citizens United was passed. And so it made me really wonder about sort of transparency and where we were headed. So it was time to eat some pierogies. They're a wonderful Polish dish. My family makes them. This is my gram and my mom and my sister with my cousin Patty. So we come together as sort of a generational thing, and my mom really held her family together. And about 7 months after this picture was taken, she had a brain aneurysm, and we had to take her off life support. So we went and we celebrated her life, and I had my 40th birthday, and there I am after jumping in the river, because it was clear to me that what I was doing in life, suddenly you have this reflection point, right? I had this huge loss. My mom, when she had her memorial, almost a tenth of the town showed up. It showed me how valuable it was to be part of that community, right? To have had that impact on people. And I realized, I'm doing good work. We had a lot of good clients. Things are kind of running themselves. This firm is doing good. But in reality, I'm feeling a little bit empty, right? And there needs to be something else to be connected with. So obviously, it's a man in a blazer with elbow patches. No, this is actually Michael Slaby. He's the Chief Innovation and Integration Officer for the campaign. So one day I went to a local startup thinking I was going to give them a sort of a Design 101 talk, and in fact it was Slaby pitching Harper Reed, Dylan Richard, Aaron Salmon, Scott Vandeplas, and myself on joining the campaign and talking about sort of where the president was positioned and thinking back to sort of what had happened previously. I knew that if we didn't actually get him reelected, he would end up being another Jimmy Carter, right? He'd be the person that they'd point at and say, oh yeah, he had all these good ideas, but Congress was against him. He's a nice guy, but he couldn't get it done. Let's move on. And so I took a gigantic pay cut and went to join a campaign for a candidate who was considered unelectable given where unemployment was at, and we knew he'd be outspent. I have a very forgiving wife. And it worked, right? We won. Things are good. So what I just did right there is called the story of self, right? And this is a traditional organizing technique. And what I'm telling you with the story of self is a challenge, my choice, and the outcome, right? So my challenge was finding meaning in my work and meaning in my life. My choice was to join the campaign to find that. It's a really weird place to reinvent yourself, but it worked out. And that's the outcome. It worked out. Here I am. So story of self is something that we use within organizing to communicate and find the story of us. When you have that one-on-one, like we saw with the two first Americans, the notion there is that you're communicating something about yourself, then you're hearing back about the other person, and you're finding whatever it is within you that makes your community, right? Whether that's a common cause or anything else, you find that touch point and you find what affects your community, and then you figure out what the story of now is. And so the story of now is basically what you need to do to move your community forward. What are the issues facing your community, and how do you move that in a direction that's positive for both of you? So that's actually a format that's been taken up by Marshall Gans. So he's the the thought behind a lot of community organizing stuff, and he's actually one of the folks at Harvard who influenced '08 and influenced 12. So this was not like this and the snowflake model. These ways of organizing were things that were never tried before in a political campaign. And so our job as user experience people were to take those types of values and move those into software so that everything that we did aligned with that sort of value set. So I realized pretty early on that a lot of my job was not actually user experience deliverables. It was actually diplomacy and consensus. Having a nationwide campaign with people with a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different values and opinions that were all super strongly held because they believed that if you're not in agreement, you're jeopardizing the president's re-election chances. Diplomacy and consensus became a big part of what I did. And as a new technology team, it was necessary to build those bridges and build that trust so that people actually would allow us to do some of the things that were more innovative as we went on. So one of the first things I did was I organized our own UX community. So I went out and I started finding people to get involved. This is Dave Castleton. He interned for us for 9 months for free because he's crazy and values driven. This is him holding up yet another printout from yet another state, from yet another field office who does things slightly differently than all the other ones. That type of modeling and that type of task flow we would repeat over and over again across the country to figure out sort of how we could actually standardize things in a way that made sense and was easy to use both for basically young folks on mobile devices and older folks on desktop computers. This is Scout Addis, who's another one of our volunteers. We worked a lot as a triage center. As you can imagine, with 200 apps, for the most part, it's really difficult to actually stick with them and have a meaningful design process from end to end. But you have a giant team because there was close to 50 designers on the team overall. So what you're doing is you're basically having folks like Scout or me or some of the other folks that we recruited come in and quickly lead a session, quickly help things out. We started early on doing full-on UX deliverables, and by the end we were working almost solely with whiteboards because of the speed of change. This is Mark Trammell. He came in from Twitter and helped us out a whole bunch with our social media. We already had a great social media team, but he helped make it one of the best in the world. In addition, these are all the other volunteers that helped out. We organized a cross-country user experience group, and so we had people in almost every battleground state and a bunch of other states going into field offices and running studies on a regular basis so that we knew how the software was actually working. We didn't have a budget because nobody who'd run a campaign before had ever thought that like user experience people would travel. They didn't really know exactly what we did. So the way that you get around that is by recruiting volunteers all over the country and having them dedicate their nights and weekends to helping out. This is our customer support team. We didn't have a support team budgeted because nobody ever thought that launching software would require support. It was one of the challenges we had, and we tried to make sure we didn't need much support, but when we did need it, that team of volunteers actually came in, organized by Brady Chris, and who's right up front holding a little dashboard logo, and we got people serviced relatively quickly. So we did some real traditional sort of user experience stuff. This is sort of that ladder of engagement. We translated that to online and tried to figure out what services and activities were appropriate for people at which stage in the process they were in. You know, were they showing up to get engaged? Were they showing up to learn more? You know, trying to figure out from people's motivations what they were doing and sort of map out, you know, how we could serve them. We looked at a lot of other sites for best practices because you don't have a lot of time to actually develop your own best practices because you're moving everything so quickly. So the thing that we did, and you saw Romney do this as well, we stole from all of industry. So we just print out good examples of whatever. You know, somebody you know, using a task flow to register, somebody using a task flow to navigate with a map, somebody doing, you know, whatever the task was. We would quickly go out and try to, you know, as part of our process, just see what else people were doing. I think Romney mostly copied us, which, I mean, made sense. They were behind us, so you kind of go, you know, after the folks in front. Bless you. So early on, the campaign had balsamic. I'll tell you a little kind of funny story about this. So one day, Edward Tufte shows up, and so like I didn't pick balsamic. I'm more of a paper and pen guy, and so they're like, oh well, you know, we have these balsamic licenses. Why don't you use it? I'm like, okay, you know, you already bought it. I'll try it out, and I'll have my team try it. So we're building stuff in this, and it's not really well formed. I mean, all this stuff is just basically junk. It's a concept. It's nothing more, because our whole functional spec for all the stuff that went online was a page long. Right? There was no spec, so you just kind of go. So we're going, and Tufte shows up, and they're like, hey, I have an idea. As I'm walking in the room, they're like, why don't you show your wireframes to Tufte? I'm like, oh, well, I can tell you why, but let's we'll see. So he was really nice, and things are good, and then we showed him this wireframe, and he got extremely upset. Right? He's like, why would you design for children? We're like, no, we're not designing. It's just, why is that typeface? It's for children. It's for school children. I'm like, okay, yes. It's balsamic. It's a wireframe, and he's like, why would you make it intentionally ugly? I'm like, oh, yes, sir, yes. And then he's like, why? What is up with this graph? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell you. It's just a placeholder. We're just going to change the subject entirely. You know, so it was. If anything worked out with that, my team was convinced I could take a beating, which was extremely useful in the months to come. Yeah, this is our first usability test. Gabe was actually a Linux developer. He'd never developed anything with a UI. It was a mind-altering experience for him, apparently. One of the things we did to help people get engaged consistently was we would test with Skype into field offices, and we'd also do weekly conference calls where we would just have basically open forums for people to give us any feedback about any of the tools we'd released. Just again, this is sort of new in politics because for the most part, you communicated up and down through a hierarchy, and we basically gave people a direct line into headquarters so that they could talk about like anything, and they did. This is Iowa. As you can see, this man is as thrilled about the software that Gabe has been working on as he is. These are two folks actually using the buddy system. So this was really common for us. Like, we would have people who really weren't that great with computers and people who were, and you never knew which was which based on any of your common assumptions. You know, you name it, whatever stereotype you would think of. You know, people defied them consistently. One of our best call tool users, which is a tool you could use online to call people and communicate with them, was a 91-year-old World War II vet. So it's not the traditional, you know, model that you're thinking of. But we made a user in Iowa cry, which is why I included this slide. It was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. It definitely changed the team. We were a little upset. They told her the only way she could get involved was via online. We're like, no, that's totally wrong. We're developing a hybrid model where you can do, you know, online or offline organizing. So we straightened things out, but it was definitely a low point. And we basically went out into the field quite a bit. And you know, here we are doing research again in New Mexico, just talking with people. And eventually we got to sort of a tile-based approach. These are some early sketches we did. And then this was sort of the final site, at least for Dashboard, which is our sort of online organizing platform. And towards the end, you know, we basically were doing stuff like this. We'd print stuff up. There's a bunch of metrics sort of running down the side here of where people are falling out of the process. And so we're doing this because you couldn't just sit there and do design work and then present it out to people, right? This is, I mean, I think it's pretty common in industry, but it was pretty new for us. Again, like, there's more of a vendor-based approach previously where people would kind of do stuff and then come back and show it. And so here we would do this real time, and we do this with the people who actually were our stakeholders. So if you were part of the field operation or part of digital organizing or any one of the other groups, you could come and participate directly, and we just design it on the fly. And it started to have impact. We actually started to see a lot of field offices actually pick up and use Dashboard, and that was kind of a big win for us. We started to marry this online and offline technology effort. And towards the end, we felt comfortable enough with this that we actually were able to get the president to give an address to volunteers on the platform. We also had Jim Messina, Jeremy Bird, Marlon Marshall, a lot of the people actually running the campaign, communicating directly to volunteers. So we morphed it towards the end of the campaign basically into an internal private TV channel where we were able to communicate what we were doing with the campaign and why people's efforts were important during it. So this is from Ars Technica. This was sort of the narwhal versus orca debate. Narwhal was our data store. Orca was an app that the Republicans created for the Romney campaign to do get out the vote. They were convinced that, I guess orcas eat narwhals. In reality, we did user research, that nationwide network of volunteers. We went out and did 3 weeks of piloting to make sure people could actually use the software, and we did a whole bunch of stress testing to make sure it wouldn't fall over. They didn't do that, so they were shipping 80-page PDFs to senior citizens the night before the election, asking them to print them out at home. It was a huge fail. They were convinced that we had sabotaged them. We didn't have to, which was good. All schadenfreude aside, this type of thing could have very well cost Romney the election in some ways because it definitely blunted his turnout effort. He wasn't able to turn out as many voters in key battleground states as he would have liked to. So, go Orca. So overall, like what made the stuff that we do work? Some of the big things go back to community. So just finding good people doing good things and working with them. Actually, that story of self-organizing stuff, like no bull, it works, right? If you start to understand where people are coming from, what their motivations are, and you take the time to realize that, and you realize your shared values, it takes time to do, but it's incredibly empowering, and it works really well. Like for us, you show up on day one, nobody knows who you are, and you're trying to build trust while you're trying to build an incredible amount of software. Taking a half hour out of your day, while it's really tricky to do because you're working an insane amount of hours, it really helped because once you started to build that trust, you started to build trust in each other and everything you did moved faster and you were able to get things done quicker. Early on, it took us forever to get everything done and through and to get things worked on because you weren't able to easily, you didn't have that trust. But once you built it, it worked wonders. Something else, so celebrate little victories. This is JP, he's a DevOps guy. Nobody else in the campaign knew his name except for the engineers because he just sat in the corner and made everything work flawlessly. But here he is ringing the bell. So every time we made $1 million we get in donations, somebody got to ring the bell. So even though nobody knew JP's name, we made sure he rang the bell because you need him to get that recognition. You need him to share in that little victory with everybody else, right? You need to share it across your team. Because we're a team that communicates via cake, we did that a lot. So here we're going to production. Yes, we cake, speaks for itself. In addition, you really need to focus. This is one of the things that leadership taught us early on. If you're running in a values-based organization and you know what your mission is, you can ignore all the crazy stuff. So, you ignore it when we're doing awesome. Like there was that time in early summer where everyone's like, this election's over, just give it to the president. And you ignore it when, like after the first debate, people are all ready to like just stick a fork in it and also call it over. You don't worry about that. You worry about what's happening that day. So, if a marching band shows up in your office, you just chill out and do what you need to do to get things working that day. You also need to have fun. We worked 7 days a week, especially towards the end of the election. This fellow is named Abhinoda. He fell asleep at his desk. There were a lot of like really evil things we could do, or like you could harangue him and say, you're not getting your work done. Instead, we just photoshopped him into this picture of Justin Bieber and distributed it around the office because you have two responses, positive or negative, so choose the positive one. Press showed up all the time and made these really intrusive, moments occur. So again, you can complain about that, or Ian Dees, who's an ex-Googler, just turned around and took a photo of it, because you might as well just celebrate that this stuff is happening and keep on moving instead of getting all bent out of shape that you can't control your environment, because you really can't do it anyway. One of the last things I learned is that value of community is immeasurable. So we were a campaign that measured everything. We A/B tested like crazy. We measured everything to the nth degree. But at the end of the day, there's all these small little pieces loosely joined that actually makes up a victory. And one of the things that brought you through at the end was, again, having community, building that internal sense that your team is all working together and that you understand the motivations of each other and you understand where you're coming from. That was enormously valuable because it sped up everything we did, and it was probably one of the greatest things that led to our success. So a quick pitch here, if you do want to do something about the way things are going in this country, stop complaining, do something. You don't have to do it on a political campaign. Organizing for Action is forming up. If there's one thing I can tell you about my experience, they definitely need designers. They definitely need user experience people. If you don't want to work for somebody like that, there's a ton of nonprofits that are horribly underserved by technology and technologists in general. They would love your time and attention. So if there's anything in your community that you feel, I wonder if I should do that, yes, you should. Let me totally reassure you, you should. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
So we have a few minutes for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll come around with the mic so we can pick you up on all the audio feeds. And I'm sure you have time later on too if we end up running a bit over.
Totally. Yep, and that's me there on the Gmail and the Twitter and all that. So if you don't get your question answered here, or you're on the remote site, I'm more than happy to chat about any of this.
Thanks. That was a great talk.
Oh, thank you.
So it seems like you did epic work on hacking the existing system very effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that obviously in very positive sense. Was there any kind of a postmortem on how broken the system is and why it was necessary to do what you did and why, what you would like to see better? That seems more of the Google way of not sort of taking the status quo for granted and trying to change it.
Yes, definitely. So I was part of the transition team. So after the election, some of the staff were held back. So we participated in some cases 3 or 4 months to kind of keep things running to Organizing for Action, which is sort of the new entity that's been set up. But yeah, we do a full 360. So every department writes their own postmortem, and then overall the campaign writes a postmortem. One of the things I did as well was I went through every app that we built that I could find that was still running in some fashion. And I gave a walkthrough on it, because one of the things that was really tough going from 12 was that you'd get like a zip file from 08. And it's like, oh, these 2 guys who were at Google, they made this in a weekend on their free time, and here it is. And you'd get this zip file and it'd have like .svn, like directory structure and stuff, but you're like, okay, so this was clearly in version control somewhere, and there was an author at some point, but now there's none of that. So yeah, we definitely made an effort to do that, and like a lot of what happened culturally as well, I think will actually shift things and make it better next time around. People just weren't really sure how you'd actually integrate technology in a campaign, and people weren't really sure that it would work. And so we were approached much more as a service bureau than as a sort of a place where strategy and innovation could happen. We got there by the end, but it's definitely something we'd want to see the campaign and just the organizations build on over time.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking bigger than that, which is how the election system may itself be broken, and would you have liked to have seen that changed?
Got it. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think this is, this came up in the AMA from the president on Reddit, and he even addressed it in the State of the Union last night, right? That like it took you, if you were in Florida, it took you 22 times longer to vote than if you lived in Vermont. And that is not fair, it's not equitable. There's a lot in terms of legislatively where things fall there, but it's definitely one of the priorities for the president in his second term in office to try to straighten that out. So like, one of the issues is that polling places are funded at the county level, right? They're not funded, they're county and state. It's not a federal funding mechanism. But he announced last night in the State of the Union that he's assembling a panel of Bob Barr from our campaign and Romney's lawyer as well, to try to come up with basically a set of election day changes that would be better for the country. Because yeah, it needs to change. And you know, in reality, you know, 12 was sort of the last chance for this type of Republican strategy to work. In other words, if you combine disenfranchisement with lots of money, you can kind of squeeze through the door by holding on to sort of the old white guy vote. That's the last election it's going to work in. I mean, the country's changing and demographics are changing. People are moving online. So there's a lot of things that are moving against that being a viable strategy.
I think during the campaign, I was getting anywhere from 4 to 6 or 8 emails every single day. And the entire time I was wondering, are they aware that each individual is getting 6 emails a day? Was there any coordination? Did you see a return on the investment? Because from my perspective, I felt like it was this constant, almost crying of wolf. We need money, we still need money, we need even more money. We know you gave money, but can we have more money? And, you know, I decided, you know, my family, we realized how much we could give to the campaign, and we gave it at that time. It wasn't like we were holding out for like the next better offer that you might be able to give us. So I'm just, I definitely would have hoped that instead it would have been a more nuanced effect of, hey, you know, we're only going to come to you when there's something new for you, for us to engage you in. So I was just really curious how that was decided and measured.
So one of the big conflicts that we had within the campaign itself was that we had 2 different teams. We had a digital team, which was responsible for everything from signage at events to inspirational videos and infographics to fundraising, right? Because they were responsible for content. So I could advise into them, but I couldn't actually like have any control over what they did. On the other hand, they had a metric that they were held accountable to, which was dollars raised. And so, you know, without having any direct ability to affect change, I would run these usability tests, and I think, you know, some of the volunteers that we had we'd use Ethnio online, and we'd do these live intercepts, and we would say things like, look, you are turning away a vast majority of the electorate by asking for email or money right up front. Like, get them in to see if you can persuade them and see how things would change. Or, hey, maybe these emails are killing people, you know, like it's just, I mean, I'm getting fatigued and I work here, right? Like, maybe there's other ways for us to ask people to get involved. And so we definitely had a lot of tension there. And I think one of the things that we came up with in the postmortem was this hope that people would do more of this. And like, campaigns don't have a unified, there's not a unified metric. And we tried to drive towards this because otherwise you don't really know what you're designing against. But if you don't know if a vote registered is more valuable than a volunteer shift, is more valuable than $1 raised, like, you can't really figure out and adjust for it. So yeah, I'm with you. I'll just say that.
Was anybody else with me other than yourself? Did it seem like the message was heard?
It's changing a lot. I mean, I think, you know, again, like, we were looked at as like a service provider, but towards the end, people started to realize, like, when we did the Facebook deal where you could sort of reach out and register friends, they started to realize, oh, there's other things you can do online than just make money. But, you know, yeah, so hopefully it'll keep moving that way.
There's a great article in Business Week that explains why they send so many campaign emails, and it says that just because it worked, like you were saying, they had to raise that much money. It said the majority of the $690 million Obama raised online came from fundraising emails. Yep. So yeah, it seems like it was just the best option. They kept doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it worked. I mean, it's the same thing. You know, it's a really tricky deal, and it's one of the things where, like, one of the components of a one-on-one is called the hard ask. So at the end, you have this great moment of like, oh, we've shared our stories. And then I sit there and go, hey, can you phone bank on Wednesday? No. Thursday? No. Friday? So, like, you know, even in the design of like our quick donate stuff, you know, you set up your account and you donate $10 and we respond with, hey, did you mean to do that? You can hit undo, or you can donate again. right? So it's like we have to be a little shameless, which is a little embarrassing, but there you go. Yes.
You talked a lot about iterating, like
Yep.
on whiteboards and not really delivering any kind of spec. How sustainable do you think that is for a startup or another business or company? Do you think that you're unique or that other companies could operate in this fashion successfully?
I think we're a little unique in that way. You know, I think we did a lot with kind of best practices and identifying stuff, but you know, everything you're doing is kind of disposable. So we would do things like we'd run weekly A/B tests, and you know, it was you like optimized for like against the current state, and you sort of had some institutional memory that, oh yeah, we tried this thing a year ago and it didn't work. But those are the types of things that in an organization that was ongoing you'd want to capture as past knowledge, right? And we didn't do that. I mean, I have you know, hundreds of versions of different flows that we discarded, and like some of those flows might have actually worked better, but we didn't keep them. And so I think there's definitely a time like where a startup kind of gets to a point where it's operationalizing and it's kind of growing in scale, and you have to be able to communicate and share that knowledge and keep it. And we never approached that sort of breakout point, because you're just basically, you're kind of triaging stuff, and you're doing it with like, okay, this is where it is today, this is where it needs to get to, let's take an hour and go. I don't think it's sustainable or frankly all that healthy the way we worked. You just have to do it. You can't move any of the dates without an act of Congress. Yes.
I wonder why it seems to me like all this campaign work that you guys did is just connected to Obama 2012. It seems to me like a much better organizing principle for collecting the result of all this work would be to accumulate it in something more long-lived than like one shot, one election. Especially when you consider like there are other elections that are going on, and a lot of these things would probably be, you know, shareable across a wide range. So it's like, you know, one of the things about so much money in politics is, you know, Obama needed to raise $1 billion because every single election needs to do its own thing independently. Doesn't that seem kind of crazy?
It is entirely crazy, yes. We did open source one thing, which was the voter registration piece, because we believed that open sourcing that had no perceived advantage for the other side, because if worse came to worse, they registered more people, which was, you know, fine. We're going to expand the electorate regardless. A lot of the other stuff, you know, we built in a very purpose-driven way, and so from like a campaign leadership point of view, they don't care about that, because their job is only to re-elect the president. So it's an enormously short-sighted goal in that way when you look at all the infrastructure built up. One of the hopes for transitioning all the work that we did to organizing for action is that they're going to need some help in figuring out sort of if they can bring some of this stuff back out in some way that would be, you know, meaningful and, you know, usable by other people, other campaigns.
It seems to me, though, that you're making sort of, by saying like, well, we can open source this one piece just because there's no, you know, we're not giving up any competitive advantage. It seems to me like you could make that argument across the entire open source community, and the entire open source community kind of disproves it, doesn't it? I mean, wouldn't making most or everything open source make a lot more sense for everybody?
I wouldn't disagree, but you know, I think we're probably birds of a feather. I think when you look at people who are, for the most part, not technologists, not really aware of what open source means or how open source communities contribute and evolve, you know, it looks like a tremendous risk, and your job is to minimize risk. And so it's easier for them just to say, hey, look, our job was to re-elect the president. We did that, and now we have these assets that have a strategic value, or they have, you know, whatever else is in their calculus. So we're gonna do the things that we believe are right for us to do with it. I think, you know, part of transition, part of what we did from a technology standpoint was make the case to open source lots of things. They'll make the right decision, you know, for the organization, and hopefully they'll take a longer term view. It will take a long time to see how that comes out, because it may very well be that, you know, like the president himself will make that decision. And so it's not probably, you know, top of the to-do list.
So one other quick question about that. The money that's given to a campaign like that, are those basically just public funds? I mean, it seems to me like maybe it's kind of like when the National Geographic Information Survey collects data, that's public data, right? Is it the same sort of deal with campaign contributions or not?
No, it's different. It's a different type of nonprofit entity. So based on the type of nonprofit, like 501c3 versus C4 versus C6, the purpose of the organization, bless you, is different. And so that's why like you can't write off contributions to a political campaign, but you can with stuff like National Geographic. And the purpose of the entity determines the taxable status, and it also determines what happens with the assets it creates. Yes?
So, first of all, I really want to thank you as a volunteer for making these tools so amazing and easy to use. Second, I was wondering if you are contemplating putting together some kind of book or presentation or paper about how user experience affects elections. So from the butterfly ballot, which was really a super poor user experience, through to your work and ORCA, how that impacts our history.
That's a really good idea. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think Dana Chisnell is doing a lot of really good work on some of the ballot and sort of voting experience. Yeah, it's quite a compliment, and thank you for volunteering.
So I think we have time for maybe just one more question if there is one, and if not, I think Jason's going to hang out for a little bit, and we'll probably go out to lunch too, so if anyone wants to join us for lunch, feel free. Thanks.
Thanks again for coming.